Yep.
Good afternoon. It is Wednesday, April 28th, 2021, and I'm calling to order the Personnel Board for the Town of McCandless. On today's agenda will be approval of the previous minutes from our March meeting. Can I get a motion to approve the previous minutes?
So moved.
Okay. Seconded, and motion passes to approve the minutes from the March meeting. Number 2 on the agenda for today is the Sergeant's Promotional Exam timetable. First, we'll go to Chief Hawk to provide us with some updates with anything concerning the Sergeant's Promotional Exam.
They're still in the middle of their study, their preparation period, Chaz. We're still on schedule to have a June 5th written exam that I'm hopeful that you and maybe other members will proctor for us. I do have those exams that I need to get to you at some point. Other than that, they're, like I said, they're just in the middle of the study period. No other really new developments there.
Okay, and we're still looking at 11 candidates for the test?
Yes, sir. Yep.
So everybody's stuck with it?
They have up to this point. I know there's one that continues to be on the fence about going forward and taking the exam, but I've elected to keep him in the process to the point where, if he doesn't show up on test day, well, then I guess we'll take that as his declination.
Okay. All right. And then letter A on today's agenda is the example of the scoring system for the sergeant's exam. I do want to thank Chief Hawk for all the time and effort he put into putting together a scoring sheet for us that we'll use during the interview process. So I would like to open that up to any discussion about if we need to make any changes to the scoring sheet, or if we want to continue forward with it as it's been sent out to the Personnel Board. Was there any comment?
Sorry, I didn't have a lot of time to look at it in advance. I was wondering, it looks like the scale was suggested 1 to 100.
Yeah.
I was wondering if it would be easier or less complicated to do 1 to 10. I don't know.
Yeah, I thought that as well, Amy, but if you look at Rule 3 from the ordinance, we actually have to score on a scale of 100 because the written exam is also on a scale of 100, and we have to use that for the composite score. So I see what you're saying, that is quite a range we have to use when we grade them, but it looks like we'll have to stick with the scale of 1 to 100. Is that correct, Chief?
That's the way I read it, Chaz.
Okay.
I worry a little bit too about general appearance and mannerisms. Maybe it's more like, I don't want to judge people based on appearance, but how they portray themselves, or like, I'm trying to think of how to rephrase that. I think what we were trying to get is like an air of professionalism, someone who, if you encounter them in the community, you feel like they would be trustworthy and competent and all of those things. And I'm not sure how else to word that, but or maybe we just add detail, like appearance might lead people to think that we're judging just based on characteristics that can't change, like, their ears are shaped funny or something. I don't know.
But could we just reference it as, keep going back, like number 1, professional appearance, presents, candidate presents himself, herself in a professional manner, presents a positive professional image of the organization. Just as a reminder. Would that be enough, do you think, Amy?
Yeah, I think positive or professional demeanor, maybe.
That's a good word. That's a good word.
And underneath, would we make any changes like Bob suggested to the wording under number 1 there, Amy? Or if you make that change to the title there, the heading of 1, does that suffice in your mind?
Yeah, I wouldn't use appearance at all. I think, again, we want to be specific that it's how they're conducting themselves and how, grooming and things that are within their control versus just what they look like. So I would title it demeanor, and then maybe the first bullet, professional demeanor and mannerisms. Maybe we just replace appearance with demeanor.
Okay.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, I could go along with that.
I think it sounds good.
I like it.
So we would title it demeanor, and underneath it would say professional demeanor and mannerisms, or just.
Yeah, I think that works.
Okay.
Was there anything more?
This is Falco. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Matt.
This is Falco. I had a question.
Go ahead.
Is my understanding correct that what we're going to do, or what you're going to do, is apply these 7 criteria to the questions, or how they answer the questions on the following page? So as they're answering these questions, you're going to be evaluating them based on these 7 factors.
Yes, that's how I took it. Chief, does that sound right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, Falco. That would be the plan anyway.
So in other words, you're not rating them just based on their demeanor. You're taking that demeanor category and applying it to how they answer question 4, let's say, or
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, they would go hand in hand, sir. They would be, how each of the interviewers rated them as they answered the questions.
Okay, so there's no scoring based on how well they handle the different scenario questions. For example, all of the scoring is based on the totality of the interview.
In theory, yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure. I know that Chaz might have how they used to do it, but we were just trying to look to update what the old standards were from the previous personnel board. Chaz, I don't know if you could speak to what you've seen. I think you might have said that it has been, it's a bit antiquated.
Yeah. These questions are new to me. They're different from what I was given by the previous chair. And those interviews seemed a lot more informal, even though they were using a scoring system. And I do remember him telling me that they were a lot more free to ask what questions they wanted. They didn't necessarily have the questions in advance. I do think, in fairness, we should, lay out the questions and try to, stick with the questions that we're going to ask so that it's consistent amongst the applicants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my understanding looking at this was that we would ask all the questions, including the scenario-based questions, and then go back afterwards and rate 1 through 7 based on the whole interview.
At the same time, do we want to keep asking the exact same questions? Or I just kind of worry about the questions being out there and the applicants having sort of too much of a rehearsal to answer these questions. I would like to give them questions that they're not completely prepared for, if that makes sense.
I follow what you're saying, Chaz. If I can throw this in, just kind of not a counterpoint, but they're competing against one another. It doesn't mean they wouldn't share them, though. I mean, they could. I would think that hopefully they would not give their competition, a leg up, but stranger things have happened, I suppose.
Yeah. If we have this list, not counting the number 9, which applies to the scenarios, we have, 8 questions here. do we have to ask each candidate all 8 questions? Can one candidate get 1, 3, and 5? Another candidate gets different questions. Does everybody have to get the same questions? I don't know if Falco can answer that one.
I'm sorry, Chaz, could you repeat that?
Would we have to give each candidate the same questions? Could each candidate get 5 total questions, but they're not all the same? They come from a list of 10 or so?
Well, again, like you were saying earlier, to maintain consistency in the scoring, they should be receiving the same questions. Within a question, there could be follow-up questions to elaborate on an answer, if there's issues that you want to pursue based on the answer. But again, for consistency, it would be best if you were asking the same questions of each candidate. Now, of course, you can ask them in different orders, rearrange them in different ways, but you want to try to have almost an apples to apples comparison in your scoring.
Okay.
And I think, sorry, I was just going to say, I think I would need answers to all of those to evaluate all the items that we're going to rate. So I would want to ask everyone all of the questions. I wouldn't want to skip like number 6, for instance, because that could be a very illuminating question depending on how they answer it. And I'm not that concerned, even if they copy down word for word and share our questions with someone else. They're going to have to put thought into how they would answer it. There is no like right answer. It's not like a math test that, number 6 is the right answer. And if they have the question in advance, they can prepare. Yes, but I'm not that concerned about it. I think we're still going to get a true read on the person based on their answers, whether or not they prepared or not.
Okay.
How are we running this thing? Are they going to be are we going to have these interviews one back to back to back, or are they going to come in on different days or different times?
That's going to depend on the availability of the personnel board. Ideally, we would have at least 3 of us there for each interview, so we can do fair scoring. And so we have, 5 people on the personnel board to work with. And like I said, hopefully we can have at least 3 personnel board members there for each interview.
Because if we're going to have them all at the same time, you could have them in a holding room, and then when they get finished with the interview, they go somewhere else. So they're physically separated. They can't share the answers.
Yeah, if we have that kind of availability, hopefully we'll have to work with the chief to see their shifts and their hours, and what we can make happen to get the interviews done.
Yeah, I'm thinking we're going to need at least 30 minutes per person, and then maybe 5 or 10 minutes afterwards to kind of collect our thoughts and fill in the first page, and maybe even an additional, like maybe we have 15 minutes in between and we spend 5 minutes doing our own score of the first page, and then we have a 10-minute discussion just so it's fresh in our mind. Because with 11 candidates, I can imagine by the time we get done with the 11th, we're not going to remember what the first one said and how we would rate them. So so figure 45 minutes a person minimum. I can't see how we would do this all in one day or one evening. I think we're going to have to spread it out a little bit.
Yeah, and if everyone passes the test, we could have 11 candidates. It could be 3 candidates or 11 candidates. We don't know at this time.
Yeah, well, that's true.
I mean, maybe I'm different than other people, but I think trying to muddle through 11 interviews in one sitting would become mind-numbing for the average person.
Absolutely. If there's 11 interviews, because like you said, we don't know how many people are going to pass. There's 11 potential.
Yes. Yeah,
I know for our council meetings, we do usually 3 or 4 at a time, just because it depends. It could take 45 minutes to an hour, including the little group discussion afterwards, and review.
Well, that's something we can revisit once we see how many interviews we're actually going to need to conduct.
Yeah, that's a simple scheduling matter for you guys. I shouldn't say simple, but it's a scheduling matter.
And we could also vary the order of the questions so that each candidate comes out with a different, so that there's not, if they start comparing notes, it's not like they go down, because they're not going to remember everything, and they'll remember the first thing, and maybe that'll just muddle it, like, oh, well, yeah, they're asking different questions.
Yeah, you confuse them by saying, well, that fourth question was terrible, it was hard, and then somebody else comes back and says, what was so hard about my name or something?
Yeah.
In regards to the actual questions we're asking, one thing we can do, rather than mulling over this now, because the chief did just send this out, everybody can look at this on their own time. And then if you want to change some of the questions, we could open that for discussion at the next meeting. And for today, we could continue running down numbers 1 through 7 and see if we want to make any changes to that. And then, like I said, revisit the actual questions next month. Does that sound okay to everyone?
Yes.
So go ahead. Okay. So was there anything else to discuss for number 1, which we're now going to call demeanor? Okay. How about number 2, alertness and self-confidence? Any discussion on that? Okay. Number 3.
All right, I'm still thinking about number 2.
Okay.
Maybe it's, and I'm not, Chief Hawk, I'm not like trying to pick this apart, but if we're trying to get to sort of cognitive strength, I think that might come out in the written test. So like readiness and grasping the meaning of questions, to me, is how bright they are, really. And I think the written test might evaluate that for us. Or is it really, alertness to me has connotations of how cheery or awake, like I'm not sure what maybe it's just around self-confidence, and maybe it's more of the presence.
I think, yeah, I don't know if you want to reword it, Amy, but number 2, their readiness and grasping the meaning of questions exude self-confidence and surety. I believe that's testing the candidates, kind of their knowledge. I mean, it all ties into one another, right? 1 through 7, we can probably all agree on that. But how quickly, and sure they are of their answer to each question, I guess it probably, like I said, speaks to their knowledge, their confidence in their decision making and such. And like I said, all 1 through 7, they all kind of tie into each other. If there's a different thing that you folks want to test in lieu of that, or you want to reword it, by all means, that's kind of why we wanted to get it out. I wanted to get it out to you folks.
Yeah, and I don't mean to pick. I'm trying to figure out what's most important, sort of the key attributes here that we're screening for. And to me, alertness wouldn't be on my top 10 list, but I don't have a better idea yet. So, and I apologize, I didn't have time to look at this in advance, so I'm talking as I'm thinking here. But could we maybe, Chaz, I like your suggestion to look at the questions. Could we maybe look at the whole thing and come back and discuss it? And I don't want to put it off.
Yeah, we can still run through this list rather quickly, but everybody can continue thinking about it. This does not have to be finalized today, but we can, since you mentioned it, we can all go back and think about, is there a better word for alertness? And we can, go forward with it like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm really wild about alertness, but I do like what they're getting at in number 2, that we want police officers that when a citizen comes to them with an important issue, and if they're contacting the police, it probably is an important issue, that the officer understands the question, and then they can assure that citizen that they will take care of it. They know how to take care of it. We don't want wishy-washy from the leaders in our police department.
Maybe right. Decisive is a word we could have used in there.
Yeah, decisive. I like that. And the other thought I had, and again, Chief Hogg, it's much easier to pick apart what someone else has done than to do it. So not at all trying to do that. But
no, yeah.
what I think is really, really important is communication, and it's sort of woven throughout. So I see it in, like, you know, positive attitude and making decisions and handling public relations well, but it's not specifically called out as its own category. So maybe that's something we could, like, does that deserve its own category, specifically as communication, how they work with others, how they work with their team, how they work with their boss, how they work with community members, etc.
Yeah, more important now than it ever has been.
Yeah. It's probably most closely related to 6, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Was there any other comment on number 2?
Yeah, I kind of see what Chief Hawks is getting at here from the movie Untouchables, when Sean Connery pulls that officer off the line that was really shooting well, and he couldn't speak to save his life. It's like, yeah, I don't want this guy. I think that's really what he's getting at with the question too, how it needs to be reworded, because you're right, alertness is, how do you really judge alertness as a like your German Shepherd is alert, but decisiveness, whatever. Yeah, we can rethink that.
All right, number 3 is interest and attitude, genuine interest in the career position sought, positive attitude about job functions. Any comments at this time about that? Amy, all right?
Yeah. No, I'm just thinking, like, I was looking at the questions and trying to figure out how we would get there. Not that each question has to correlate to a category, but I think the question of, you know, why do you want to be a sergeant or what motivates you would help us to rate that one.
All right, number 4 is judgment and problem solving, ability to exercise good judgment, make decisions. Seems dependable, uses logic during the decision-making process. Any comments at this time about number 4?
I'd like to see us maybe use a behavioral question here. So we ask some kind of what would you do or how would you handle it type questions, especially in the scenarios. Maybe this is an area where we ask specifically, tell us about a time where you made the wrong decision or your judgment wasn't in hindsight what you wish it had been, or you solved a problem and what was your thinking around the steps that you used to solve that problem. Something where instead of the hypothetical, we could say, go back to a situation and walk us through it to kind of get more insight into the process behind their judgment, their decisions.
Yeah, and that could always come in the follow-up questions we ask.
Yeah.
Well, you know, with the standard 9 questions or so that we have, but that is a good idea.
And number 5, question 5 on the page below it, it would probably isn't exactly what Amy's driving at, but I think right now it's worded as what is your biggest failure and or regret in life, but that could be, you know, speak to something that they've done in their career as opposed to in life in general.
Mm-hmm.
So anything else for number 4? Okay. Number 5 is responsibility and maturity. Possesses the maturity necessary to handle the position, reflects integrity and seriousness. Any comment on that?
Seriousness, meaning they take it seriously?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we want anyone to convey the attitude that they don't like our questions or we're wasting their time, that we do want them to take the entire interview process seriously.
Okay. And the only reason I was questioning is I think a sense of humor can be a great asset on any job, even for a police sergeant. So I wouldn't want to like say, okay, if they're joking around a little bit, they're not serious. But I think we all can draw that line for ourselves.
Yeah, I wouldn't see joking around as any kind of issue, but maybe an eye roll after we ask a question, that's not a good thing during the interview. And this would be the category where we could deduct points for that. All right. Number 6 is working relationships, and that's the ability to handle stress, promotes worker cooperation, handles public relations well. Any comment on that?
How will we determine their ability to handle stress?
Probably through the questions asked, I would assume, Amy, the scenario-based questions, perhaps, like Chad said, if you folks felt the, ability and interest going through these scenarios, and, if Falco didn't disagree with it, maybe you could, as they're answering, like these in-basket exercises and such, maybe as they're answering a question, you throw another wrench into the problem and see how quickly they how well they respond to that. I don't know if that's something you folks want to consider or not, where you take those scenario questions and kind of grow them and kind of switch things up and maybe give them more to think about, more to consider. I don't know if that's something where you folks feel comfortable enough on your feet to do. That would be one way I would assume you could kind of test, the little bit of stress you're throwing at them, maybe see how well they respond to a changing situation, so to speak. What's the rapidly evolving, nature of these calls that sometimes that they are on.
Yeah, and it actually may come down to the questions that you're asking. Maybe it's a question, instead of asking strength and weakness, maybe it's a matter of tell us what situations would in a police officer, in a daily situation, may cause the most stress, and how would you handle it? What kinds of situations would have you thinking? I sounds too touchy-feely right now, but thinking like in a positive light. What kind of positive interactions could you have within your normal work day? And maybe you could ask the question in the sense that, or even historically, were you in a situation that caused an extreme amount of stress? How did you react?
Yeah, what happened? How did you deal with it?
Yeah, if they say I went home and drank a fifth of whiskey, that's going to be a little bit different than I went to the gym and worked it out. Thinking a little different.
Yeah, I mentioned this before, but I'm a big fan of the behavioral questions, which is basically looking back instead of the hypothetical, what would you do? How did you deal with it? Because, they have an obligation to be truthful, and they're telling us what they actually did, but more importantly, why they did what they did, and if they would do that again, or if they might do it differently next time, and what they learned from it, if anything.
Yeah, just like the leader question, rather than what makes a good leader, tell us about a time where you had to take the lead in a situation. What did you do? How did you handle it? I think that the questions, Chief, are a great starting point, but we may want to turn them a little bit, as Amy said, to make them a little more behavioral or a little more situational, so that we can gauge what we're getting out of the candidate.
Absolutely. And I have a feeling, without knowing a whole lot about Amy's background, that she's probably got a wealth of information in dealing with these types of things. So now's the time to pick it, and change what we think we need to change. Absolutely.
Well, and a lot of these questions, I think Bob's right, that these are a great start. And a lot of these, I think, would be very applicable to patrol officer interviews too. So if we spend some time kind of getting this to be exactly what we want it to be, then we can hopefully leverage it for that process as well.
So is there any other comment on number 6? Okay.
can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
And this may be directed more towards the chief, but how do we factor in the historical performance reviews of these officers as we, kind of work through this process? Do the folks interviewing the candidates even have an opportunity to look at their performance reviews? And I'm coming at this from a corporate world. So this, as most of you know, this is my first foray into public service. So I'd look at everything through a corporate lens, but certainly most of the time in a corporate world, when there's a promotion going on like this is more of a, I guess, just a, the process you go through. You already have your intended target that you want to promote within the organization. The rest of it is just filler to get that person through. I don't see that being the same here, but I am wondering, when you look at items like stress, that's certainly probably something that can be drawn out from looking at someone's performance review over the last 10 years and seeing the notes that were taken by, whoever was doing that performance review. So just kind of curious, do we take into consideration, is their past performance reviews brought into this process?
So from what I've seen, and forgive me that I've never been on this side of it yet, Mark, but from what a little bit of records I've seen from the previous chief, or maybe two chiefs ago, there's like a little a write-up where the chief has taken their personnel files and given a little synopsis, and I have to nail down if there's anything I'm not able to share, but I would probably give you folks, if you were agreeable to it, this little, there was the ones I saw, there were a couple paragraphs long or so, but a write-up of, their work history, maybe if sick time comes into it, about what their average sick use is per year, what kind of accolades they've received from the community, any kind of disciplinary matters that might be in their jacket, their file, anything that I can share with you folks. I certainly would plan on doing so prior to your interview of the candidates.
Well, and maybe that's a good way to do it. And maybe we say, if we interview 8 people, we narrow it down to 4, and then we'd want to talk to you about those 4. And I think having a write-up with all the things you mentioned, discipline, accolades, et cetera, would be great. And I would love to get your perspective on how does the person handle stress? I mean, they may have a great answer in our interview, but you've seen in real life that they don't handle it well. They get explosive, or who knows what, So I think that would be really relevant. I agree with Mark, from a corporate perspective, your opinion is paramount. So hopefully, if Falco agrees, we're allowed to discuss with you either before the interviews or after the interviews, or maybe both, your perspective on these candidates.
Certainly. If Falco is in agreement.
I was just going to say, yes, that's normally my experience as part of the process as well, that you get the input from the chief.
Hey, Chaz, one last question. I'll make it brief because I've sat through a couple of these meetings now. We all these officers are going through the study time now. They're reading all the material. They're going to go through the exam. Those who pass the exam are going to move on to the interview round with whoever's selected off this committee to sit down and interview them. Where do you go from there? You got the exam scores, which are black and white. Then you have the interview scores, which will somewhat be black and white with a little bit of individualism in there. But how is the ultimate selection for this person made? And I apologize if I'm asking questions you guys already know, but I just want to understand, once all this is done, do we provide it all to Chief Hawk and he makes the decision, or
no, actually,
that happen?
Is we'll get the top 3 candidates, like you said, from the test score and from the interview score, and then we compile those to give us the numbers, and that gives us our top 3. And then I'm going to do a little write-up on each candidate, and then we put those 3 names in front of the town council, and they would pick from those 3 names for the next sergeant. Chief, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I believe you got it, Chaz. There might be a council interview. I believe there is with all of the finalists. And then a decision's made by council after they interview each of those three finalists. They can select one of the three. And as far as military veteran, I don't know that comes into play for promotional process. Falco or Bob could speak to that if they know, but I believe council has the leeway to pick one of those top three after they interview them.
Do we suggest here's three and you pick one, or we suggest here would be, if we were selecting, we would do 1, 2, 3, and council can either agree with us or disagree?
I believe it's score-based, overall score-based.
The score will determine the order or the ranking.
Okay.
You'll provide an eligibility list to the town of all of those people who passed the test. You certify that list. The council then will interview the top 3 candidates from that list. They would make a selection from those 3.
So
if there's a second position to be filled, we would look at the 2 remaining candidates, interview another one. We will always interview from the 3 list as long as we have an eligibility list and we have the 3 candidates.
So at what point would our conversation with Chief Hawk come into this? I'm guessing we would have to do that before we fill out the interview, because like I said, that's an important part of it for me. So the interview scores and the oral scores, but how do we incorporate that feedback?
It's a great question, Amy. I couldn't agree with you more. I have that same exact question because Chief Hawk knows these guys. He knows these individuals, and maybe there's some ladies on the force too. But I mean, you know these people better than anybody. And I made the comment a few minutes ago. You know, if this was the corporate world, there's already a pre-selected candidate. I mean, you already know who the top 3 are. I mean, there may be 11 candidates, but you know who the top 3 people are, and you know why they're the top 3. So how does that come into play, or does it not?
I was going to say, can I interrupt, guys? In past, when we had done the hiring, promoting, DeSanti, or it was always DeSanti who was in the meetings. He would kind of do an overview and ask questions, and we would ask questions. So I would see Ryan a part of all that. If we're still going to be doing as we have in the past, Ryan should be in the room with the council and given the chance to ask questions and do introductions and stuff.
But and that's good. I agree with that. But in my mind, that's too late, because then we already have the top 3. We might have ruled out his top candidate because they're not a terrific interviewer.
Yeah.
But we also want to be as fair as possible in this position that, we do want to give the greatest amount of weight to how they did on the test and then how they did through the interview process. Chief Hawk is awesome and I greatly trust his opinion, but just in general, maybe it's not the best idea to have the police chief undermine certain candidates that could be good. That's not the case in our police department, but we don't want to set that precedent, because that could be in other police departments that you could have a great candidate that, a chief could undermine, if that makes sense to everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's possibility for his opinion to influence us either more or less favorable for any candidate. But personally, that's what I would want, because, to Mark's point, that's valuable information. I don't work with these men and women every day, if there is a woman. He does. He knows them 10 times better than we're going to get to know them in the 30 minutes it takes us to do this interview. So yes, we have to be fair and we have to be consistent. But I feel like if we're not incorporating his perspective until we get to council, then it might be too late, because we might have ruled out the top candidate who didn't have a great day when we had the interview and stumbled around on the questions and didn't answer them well.
This is Falco. While it's important to get the chief's input prior to doing your oral interview, the chief's input should be as objective as possible. It shouldn't really be to skew you one way or the other towards a particular candidate. You still want to have an impartial, as much as possible, oral interview. Now, what the chief could do is if he's fashioned these questions, he could kind of cue you in, this is what you should be looking for in this question, knowing the strengths and weaknesses of each candidate, so that as you're weighing those factors, what you should be looking for when they answer, what motivates you, what's your biggest failure. He knows his staff, he knows his officers. He can tell you, well, look for or keep your ears open for this potential, concern or issue with respect to those answers. But he shouldn't do it in the sense that he's targeting a particular candidate or red flagging a particular candidate. It should be more across the board. Where the chief's input really comes into, and I know, the concern is that that's too late, is once you do have your final pool of candidates and he's making a recommendation amongst those top 3 to the council for hiring, that's where they're, I'm sure, going to look to him for a clear recommendation on which one he feels of those top 3 is the best choice. So again, I know this is a balancing. We want to definitely get the chief's input, but it has to be provided in a way that's not going to create bias or partiality towards one candidate or the other.
Falco, could there be, like, as you're looking at the questions themselves, and I'm not trying to prolong a 30-minute interview necessarily, but where there's perhaps a 10th question that would be slightly more open-ended, but based on the candidate's history with the town, their review of a personnel jacket as much as the chief can provide. I know that wouldn't be the same question for everybody, but there would be a similar question that may come up as a result of that review.
Can I just add on to that too, what Bob is saying? Is there any way to factor in a weighting in this process for the interview, the exam, and their performance history, which should be a direct reflection of how, Chief Hawk has reviewed these officers over the years? Is there a way to perhaps give a weighting of 30% of the overall process towards their performance review, which should include things like how they've handled stress?
I think at this point, the decision pretty much is to stay with the current weighting, right?
Yeah,
Written and interview.
but here's maybe a way to factor it in without changing. So the categories that we're rating on the first page here that Chief Hawk has put together, maybe we add number 8 to say past experience and leadership's evaluation of that experience. So it could include the personnel file, it could include the chief's experience with them. And so it's a whole different, it's not an additional question, to your point, Bob, on the second page that we ask them, but it's a category by itself. So it gets one of those rating scores that factors into the overall interview score.
That would make sense in my mind. And Falco can certainly chime in from a legal perspective.
Yeah, and again, I think, yes, you could add that to the 7 criteria, but going back to then how the chief reports that, again, if you have an annual evaluation that contains some negative information, reporting that information objectively to the board is, again, perfectly appropriate. It's giving the board objective information that exists in a personnel file. So the chief can definitely do that going into the oral interview, so that now you're kind of looking for, or what a potential weakness is, and you're looking in the answers to see if the candidate has sufficiently addressed those concerns. again, that's an objective reporting by the chief. Hey, I've got an officer with, something in their jacket, that raised concerns. I'm just going to report that to you without editorializing or, saying, don't make him sergeant because I can't work with the man. I mean, it's got to be a more objective presentation to the board, as opposed to trying to sway you in the direction or against a particular candidate.
Mhm.
I don't know if that makes sense, but I think it definitely could capture adding a number 8 to the criteria. And again, the chief giving some objective reporting of what their past history is with the township.
Falco, does it have to be something that's documented in the personnel file, which apparently is called a jacket in the police world? or could it be that we ask Chief Hawk to comment on, here's this person's, as I see it anyway, and working with him every day, top 2 strengths, top 2 opportunities for improvement. Here's anything of note, good or bad, from the personnel file. And then if there's anything else that, like, if he does that consistently for each of the candidates that pass the written test, like,
Mhm.
would that be fair to ask him to do something like that?
So that they're all treated the same with the top 2 strengths, top 2 weaknesses. Yes, you could probably do that.
Okay.
Puts a lot of stress on the chief, to come up with how he's going to objectively portray that. I mean, I would assume that all of these candidates have been with the township for years and they have a history and they have a reputation. I have not heard, at least up to this point, that there's any major red flags or concerns. But obviously the chief works with them, knows their personalities, and would be able to identify those more esoteric kind of traits, that might factor into your review.
Well, it also, I'm just thinking out loud here, it also gives us an opportunity to test sort of their self-awareness. So, if Chief Hawk says this person has some opportunities around communication and decision making, and then we ask them, what are your strengths? And they say, I'm a terrific communicator. And, like,
Yeah,
it'd be
I agree.
interesting to see if those things match.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, so I think that the issue here now is, do we want to hear from the chief and hear what's in their jacket prior to the interviews so we can craft some of the interview to get at what their weaknesses or violations might be? Or do we want to give them a clean slate? They get the test, they get the interviews. We try not to know much ahead of time. And then afterwards, we hear from the chief. And then I can put something in my write-up to the town council that this applicant has a great score, had a great interview, but has had a dozen citizen complaints, so we have some reservations. So we sort of have to decide, when do we want to hear from the chief and when do we want to know what's in their jacket? Is it before the interview or after the interview?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have that answer. I don't know that it's ever been part of the process here, other than that little write-up, Chaz, that I saw that Gary Anderson, I believe, used to provide. And I mean, I can speak to you folks whenever, we think is most appropriate, or provide that information to you, rather, I should say that, I guess. And like Falco said, being objective, I guess, is what's important. How do I relay the information? What exactly can I share, and am I not able to, are the questions at hand, and I don't know who has those answers. Without having it in front of me, reading over one of, some of previous chiefs, it appeared he was able to relate the pertinent information to the personnel board or council without being partial. He made general comments about sick time use and such, and somebody doing exceptionally well in investigations, and I, as best he could, to remain impartial and I guess unbiased, but still relay the information. When do I get that to you folks? I don't know, is it up to us to make that decision? I get, I understand what Amy's saying, you'd want to have that going in, you want a game plan, so to speak.
It would be my preference to see that before the interviews. And it also sounds like it might be prudent for you to put that in writing, literally have like 3 or 4 questions per person that pass the written exam. You put it in writing, maybe even run it past Falco and say, is there anything in here that you see that's not, that's perspective or more subjective than we would want it to be, kind of a thing. You send it to us in advance, and then I think that allows us the opportunity to dig a little bit in the interviews if we're concerned about something, versus hearing it afterwards and then having to say, gee, that doesn't at all mesh with what I heard in the interview. And is it just that they forgot to mention it or whatever? I don't know. That would be my preference if we get to make that call.
I would think that'd be something that our personnel board could vote on. We don't have to do it today, but maybe next month we make a final decision between myself, Matt, and Amy. Do we want to hear from the chief beforehand, or do we want to go into this interview process being as impartial as possible, and then hear from the chief afterwards? So that is something we could vote on as a personnel board for next month's meeting.
I don't know, Chaz, Matt, do you guys have another perspective? Maybe there's something I'm not considering.
I haven't digested it too much. I haven't thought this through, but right now, my gut feeling is to be as fair as possible. These applicants, I don't want to hear from anyone about them before we start the interviews. I want them to come in and they get to make a good first impression. I understand that, we value Chief's opinion, and I want Chief to have sergeants that he's going to be comfortable working with and that he knows well. But at the same time, I don't want to be biased in any way when these interviews start. I want to give every candidate a fair shake in this.
Yeah, understood.
There is that, but there's also the Chief Hawk could give us insight into the questions that we need to be asking them, and he could give it to us in a way that wouldn't bias us against any particular candidate. I mean, I think that's what Amy's getting at. It's like he's got an institutional knowledge there that we don't have, an insight that we would need in interviewing them. And he can do it in a way where he's not trying to single anybody out and say this guy or this individual is not worth, not worth your time.
Yeah, but we did mention at some point knowing about what's in their jacket, and that would bias us before the interview if we know about any kind of complaints or disciplinary actions or anything like that. I mean, do we want to hear that before the interviews, or is that?
Well, that kind of stuff you could hear afterwards. But what I'm saying is that Chief Hawk could help us understand where we need to probe in the interviews.
Okay. Well, everybody can maybe think that through, and then we could make a final decision next month. Does that sound all right?
Mm-hmm.
It's fine with me.
Okay. All right. Was there any comment on number 7, job knowledge, from anyone?
My only comment is I don't know that I'm competent to judge that. I mean, we're going to ask them, I forget what the question was, what the pursuit policy, but I don't know how I would judge how familiar they are with SOPs or the collective bargaining agreement. Like, I'm not familiar with them, so they could, yeah.
I pretty much guarantee they all know the collective bargaining agreement.
And as far as the policy goes, obviously I could provide you folks with a copy of it if there was no issue with that, so that you know what the answer should be, or we could use, any number of items. It doesn't have to be that. Maybe we, talk about town ordinances or something like that. Use something else.
Oh, can we talk about the political signs? No, I'm sorry.
Chickens, feeding the deer.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Oh,
Disasters.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. If we're going to ask them about the pursuit policy, we should probably know what it is, so we're, judging if they know it too.
then for next month, like we had talked about, these 9 questions on here, everybody can take a look at this and think about if we want to make any changes, and we can work to finalize that for next month. If you have any questions about it in the meantime, nothing wrong with you send an email to Chief Hawk, and maybe Chief Hawk only, and you can ask him if you have any questions to clarify some things. But everybody can hopefully come back next month, and we can have 9 or 10 good questions in place that we're going to use for the promotion process.
Are we already scheduled for next month? And I only ask because I love having Matt Lucas on the board. I'd love for him to make it. I know scheduling for this group is a bear. So Nick, thank you for helping us with that. But
yeah, of course.
I'd love to get his perspective as well.
Yeah, I mean, we can for next meeting, depending on, I'm assuming we're going to want to have it probably, what do you say, Chaz, between like 2 weeks and no later than the end of May, we'll say. So I'll do my best to make sure that we do have Matt on the next call.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Monday through Thursday afternoon into evening he's not available, but maybe
yeah, his work schedule presents issues, but I mean, maybe we can try to aim for a Friday, or sometime. Maybe pray that he has a day off or something. We can be willing to join us or something. I'll communicate with him separately as soon as we're done here to try to hash that out best I can.
Thank you.
All right. So moving on to number 3, this is rules of procedure for police appointments. And last month we had authorized to make changes to A, B, and C of 137.05 Rule 2. Section 202. We seem to be solid with A, be at least 21 years of age, and C, concerning the motor vehicle license. But B, we still had some debate about the college degree and military experience. Mark, did you want to weigh in on whether or not we should make changes to what we accept for military experience? Because right now, it looks like the military experience we're asking for would be serving as a military police officer in the military. So you can go ahead and weigh in on that.
Yeah, I strongly believe we should consider making veterans that served 4 years eligible to apply for a position in our township. I think we should be honored. As somebody who probably has interviewed 100 people in the past 6 months, I interview both veterans and college graduates. I won't take all the time needed to kind of split up, the difference between the two, but I don't think a college degree necessarily ensures the type of maturity that we need representing our township. So I would really like for this committee to consider adding a 4-year veteran to the list of eligible candidates for this position. Doesn't mean they necessarily get the job, but at a minimum, we should give them the opportunity to apply and go through the process. Anyway, that's my position, my thoughts.
Okay. Matt Shipley, what do you think about that?
Off the hand, I like it. The only problem I have with it is that I think that what we're getting at with that 4-year degree is experience. And if you're just bringing and the 4-year degree is not just any college degree, which we needed to bring out. It should be a college degree oriented towards law enforcement. Otherwise, it's kind of like, really, basket weaving or something else. Or somebody who's taken engineering and then wants to become a police officer. But either way, it was experience in that particular field or orientation in that particular field. So I think that, yes, we should definitely look at anybody who's spent 4 years in the military. They have a wealth of knowledge and background that people who go to college or do anything else don't have. I'm not sure how to include that, but I think that what our purpose here was is that we want to focus on people that are concentrating on being a law enforcement officer, and that's the experience they're bringing to the table with the 4-year degree or the 4-year military experience.
Okay, so we could add language that if you are a 4-year veteran of the armed forces, and we could also add honorably discharged,
Yes.
Count for experience?
Hey, Matt, I was not aware that when we had those previous discussions, 4-year college degree meant that that person was pursuing some sort of degree in law enforcement or criminal.
Right, that's why we didn't say it. I mean, that's, I discussed that with Chaz between the last meeting. It's like, hey, this shouldn't be any degree that we're talking about here. This should be a degree oriented towards law enforcement.
Well, and I think when we first started looking at this criteria, gosh, it's probably been a year now, we were trying to widen the pool because there's fewer people wanting to go into police work nowadays, just given everything going on in the world. And so I'm okay with widening it to include those with 4 years of military experience, but I hesitate to say they have to have a 4-year college degree related to policing. I think that's going to very drastically cut our number of applicants that, maybe they went and they studied engineering and then decided that wasn't for them and they got interested in police work. And I don't know that we should necessarily rule them out because of that.
Before we need to discuss the college degree, we absolutely do. Let's take care of the military side though. Let me ask Chief. Chief, so if we're just going to say 4 years Armed Forces honorable discharge, are you okay with someone who served the United States Army for 4 years? They were a water purification specialist. They did not deploy anywhere. Is that enough experience for you, or do you want something more specific in terms of military police or something like that?
More experience related to the field would always be preferred, Chaz, but I also don't want to turn my back on someone who served the country and, had an honorable discharge. I think that you could have folks that would have, skills in many different areas that would benefit this police department. So I know, probably hard to do a case by case basis as far as that goes, but could it say, well, I guess it could. I was thinking, could it say, 4 years military experience, military police preferred, but I guess, at the end of the day, you're not excluding anybody. I don't know, military veteran's a military veteran to me, but, probably others could speak better to that than I.
But if somebody isn't a veteran, we're saying that 4 years, they need 4 years of law enforcement experience in order to take the test. I guess my question is, if we're going to make that requirement from a civilian standpoint, why wouldn't we be looking for the same thing out of the military side?
And that's kind of what I was getting at, is that, a 4-year degree with 4 years experience in law enforcement. Okay. That person shows a desire to be a law enforcement officer. If you're just getting a 4-year degree, coming out with a 4-year degree, and let's say somebody couldn't get a job doing what they wanted to do, and they say, well, they're hiring the police department, I'll go do that. Do we really want somebody like that around? And that's really what I'm getting at. I don't want to narrow the field of applicants, but I certainly don't want to get people who are just taking this on because they can't do something else.
Well, I think and Matt, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but I'm just, the conversations that the chief and I have had, that we've been having in general here, is that there could well be people who have a degree in something other than criminal justice, law enforcement, who they wanted to broaden their knowledge, but they didn't necessarily want to go down that the criminal justice area, but they still want to be in law enforcement somehow. You know, I'm
Right, and that's where does it come in that their desire to be in law enforcement come out? I mean, I think I'm
well,
not sure criteria, but go ahead.
I think in some ways, the fact that I think it comes out during the interview process in terms of a patrol officer interview process.
Yeah, I agree. This doesn't get them hired. This gets them able
It just
to.
gets them in the door to take the test.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I don't want to go, again, like I said, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but, you know, in today's world, you know, we actually just listened to a presentation by Slippery Rock University, an internship program they're doing in Hampton with social workers. You know, if there's somebody who's in the social sciences or taking a degree in social sciences, but with the intent that they want to enter law enforcement to change the complexion of it to some degree, should they be able to take the test? I guess is one question. You know, I had a personal experience where I had a nephew who went through an education program, decided at the end that teaching really wasn't what he wanted, but he had a very good or a strong interest in law enforcement. He talked to me, and you know, we helped him get there, another state, but and he's doing well in that regard. So, you know, I hate to focus too much in on that from an education standpoint. You know, the experience, I think, has to be, you know, we need to know if they're not going to, somehow or another, the experience has to reflect the desire, I think. But maybe,
Right. Well, given your argument there, then why not just?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I just argued against myself.
Then why not just, we'll take people with 4 years of military experience.
Yeah.
No matter what they're.
Yeah,
what they're,
I got there. It's like I just went in a circle and argued against myself. I get it. Happens. I confuse myself all the time with that. I mean, those are just some thoughts that had crossed my mind with all of it. So
yeah, I'm not being facetious. I'm saying, well, let's include the 4-year military experiences. I think that's a good idea then. Given your
I
argument,
agree with
it was a good argument. Even if it was against yourself, it was a good argument.
Oh, good. Thank you. Appreciate that.
So we're comfortable with accepting 4 years in the military, honorable discharge, regardless of MOS or deployment, anything like that. Is that where we're at?
Yes, that's where I'm at.
Okay. Chief, would we be assuming that they've gone through the police academy if they're applying to the town of McCandless, regardless of their experience?
Well, I believe that is one of the current requirements, Chaz, that they have to meet and have to provide to us a copy of their Act 120 certificate.
That would actually be their confirmation of interest. Now that I'm thinking about it.
Absolutely would.
Yeah, that answers that question, because you're not going to take that lightly, because there's a lot involved in having to go through that.
Yeah, it's 6 months or better now, probably longer than that full time.
Yeah,
and thousands of dollars to take that police academy on your own.
And would the police academy accept them with that kind of criteria, just being a veteran or just having any college degree?
Yeah, likely.
Okay.
Well, that should be our litmus test right there.
there it is.
Okay. And we can definitely add that about the military. And do we want to have any language about a specific college degree, GPA, anything like that? Or are we just saying college degree from accredited college or university?
I believe that's how most are doing it.
Okay.
No GPA that I've seen listed or major in particular.
Okay. So they had a 2.0 in basket weaving or a 4.0 in chemistry. Take them.
Again, I think we can make that part of our decision criteria about who we want to hire, but I wouldn't narrow the field at this point.
Okay. So anything else for letter B? Okay. Did anyone want to open up any discussion for letters D through J? Okay. Chief, can I ask you real quick? There was a recent court case about the physical fitness test concerning the Pennsylvania State Police. Would that have any bearing on the type of physical fitness test that we would conduct for our initial hires?
I'll have to research that. I heard that there was something that came down, Chaz, handed down. I haven't had an opportunity to see it. If it's relating to the state police, they're kind of their own entity apart from municipal police officers. So requirements for us are going to be different. I mean, depending on your agency, I had to pass a whole different set of standards for the city of Pittsburgh than I had to do for the town of McCandless. So I think it's probably specific to what your agency chooses to use, but I will research that state police decision. And if there's anything I think that would affect us, I'll let you folks know.
Appreciate it. Because I think we had discussed in the past that we were going to stick with letting the police academy, Allegheny County Police Academy, conduct the physical fitness test. But there were other police departments that had, a run, push-ups, and things like that. And that could be an issue if you're creating a situation where female applicants were scoring significantly lower than male applicants and being, denied a job. I think that was the issue with the Pennsylvania State Police court case. So I would appreciate if you would, keep us abreast of what's going on with that.
Yeah, and the Municipal Police Officers Education and Training Commission, MPOETC, MOPATEC, they call it. It's likely that they may try to follow it, and if they do, then it would be handed down for all municipal agencies to abide by. Are they affiliated with the Pennsylvania State Police? Not that I'm aware of, but they probably try to mirror or, follow guidelines that they can, that the state has in place. So definitely something we have to continue to monitor and keep track of.
Okay. So any other discussion from number 3 on the agenda before we move on to number 4?
Do we ask our officers to go through an annual physical fitness test or one every 5 years to make sure that they're still healthy and capable of doing the job?
There's, as part of the hiring process, there is one, Mark, but once they are hired, there are no annual requirements. And I believe, though, as far as the promotions go, there's not a physical agility, but there is a physical from a doctor that they do have to undergo to make sure that they're healthy physically anyway to take the promotion. That's at the very end. That's the ones that the one that you are trying to promote, though. At least that's how the process has been up to this point. So you're only sending your final, your tentative promotion or promotions.
I guess I go to too many Steeler games in the fall and I see the city of police, Pittsburgh Police Department walking around by the stadiums. It's deeply, deeply concerning to me.
Okay.
Depends on what agency you work for, Mark. The city, yeah, they have those, but I think every agency does. And currently there are no standards where there's an annual requirement, unfortunately.
Just curious, and I'll make this the last question. Would you support implementing some sort of annual or every 5-year physical fitness test for our police force?
I would not object to anything of the sort. I believe that, and Matt Shipley could probably speak to this, the military does something where they have to stay in shape. Isn't there something in place there? Why wouldn't it translate into your law enforcement?
Yeah, there's an annual physical fitness test, but Falco or somebody could speak to the, the municipal nature of this thing and the contracts, the laws. I have no idea about all that. That's a quagmire.
I think we had brought this up before, Mark, and the response was the CBA would have to be renegotiated to do something like that. And so that was kind of a stopping point.
I also wrote about that in my report to town council back in November, that there is no annual physical fitness test for the police department. And there were some officers that felt that there should be. They'd be a lot more comfortable with having their fellow officers have to pass some kind of physical fitness test once a year, twice a year.
And I would agree that it would be something that would have to be negotiated.
All right, number 4 on the agenda for today is Citizens Police Academy. And Bob, I'm not sure who's gonna speak on that.
Well, we're moving forward with some of the plans for that. The chief can probably speak more to that, but I think a part of that, an early part of that academy, right, Chief, would be a discussion of what the requirements are, the process, and it would be great to have some of the people from personnel board there. But we are moving forward with our plans to hold the academy. And have we come up with a number of sessions yet, Chief?
Right now, we're kicking around the idea of about 8 weeks, 1 evening a week, 2 to 3 hours. We like the idea of about 20 or less participants. No way of knowing what it's going to look like this fall when we try to roll our first one out, but we're talking about September maybe through November. Any person that applies, there'll be obviously an application period, and we're going to have to do background checks on candidates, decide who's accepted into it, who's not. I think we believe anything, beyond a misdemeanor offense would probably, and don't, hold me to this, it's still undecided, but would probably be a disqualifying, a reason to disqualify someone from attending.
Hey guys, I'm sorry. I got to run to a 2:30 work meeting. I can catch up with Chaz or someone on, get the rest of afterwards. Okay.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you. Bye.
But yeah, and we are in the process of trying to line up, topics, speakers, costs. Carolyn, if she was still on here, her and I are going to sit down, and I've provided her our syllabus, if you will, tentatively, what the topics would be. There'd be some costs, and this is probably more a discussion for council to approve or not, that we envision, but we would try to do as much as we could in-house, and not much of a cost to the town, we're hoping, other than maybe some sim tech training. But yeah, we are in the process of trying to plan that as we speak.
I'm sorry, what's the intent of the Citizens Police Academy? What are you trying to achieve?
Probably more community engagement, Matt, would be.
What I thought, yeah.
Yeah. Just to, give folks that have an interest the opportunity to see the world through the police's eyes a little bit, an education to the public on why we do some of the things we do, that kind of thing. And maybe some of them take it back to their neighborhoods and, help out with their neighborhood watches and such.
Okay.
Matt, I think it also ends up giving the police an avenue to hear from some residents with specific questions that they have based on the topic of the night. So it is that engagement opportunity, and it's normally very successful in communities.
Nick, did we have anybody that wanted to make public comment today?
I don't see any members of the public here. I know we had everything posted to Savvy Citizen and on our website and everything. John Bogarski helped me with that. frequent flyers, you know, Rita Martin and Ramona Nelson. I thought maybe at least one of the two would be here, but I don't see anyone. So.
Okay. All right, so is there any other business to discuss before we adjourn today?
Here.
Okay, so for next month, we will have to decide a final list of questions on how we word the scoring criteria. And then we'll also have to decide if we want to hear from the chief before the interviews or after, or it could be a little bit of both. We can discuss that next month, and Nick will get out a schedule to us, and we'll put a date in concrete for next month.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Good deal.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Good.
All right.
Out of here.
Thank you.